14,000 years of traditional ecological knowledge of First Nations, our 70-something years, maybe even longer, of Western science, ecological science, and then we also have to look at what have we done in colonial times for the last 180 years, like how have we changed all these forests and landscapes? What have we done to the land now? What changes have we made? What are the results of doing all of that? And I think it's really to our own detriment. But anyway, those are some of the big sort of lines of information that I like to pull from. And we've just got to understand a lot better what these ecosystems can do for us for free. Anyway, let's head down the trail and get away from all the noise here. Show here too, like just sort of some of the different layers of the forest canopy, right? So everything that's above ground is going to be the forest canopy, right? But we've got some of the Douglas-fir seedlings on the hillside there. We've got some grasses, we've got some ferns out ahead of us, we've got the maple tree, and then several layers of maple trees. You can see the dark green, I should say, and then you got the taller big conifers in behind. But it's just, again, it boils down to how diverse, how many layers, how cool and shady and moist it is, and making sure that the water isn't running off through ditches or ditched creeks, that it's staying on the land, and that we're getting it into the soil and down into the aquifers and those types of things. So if nothing else, we need to keep these forests in a complex, multi-layered condition so that we can be preventing forest fires. So by having that kind of species complexity, having the multi-layers, and having these forests be as inverted watersheds, we are helping those conditions, or we're making sure we maintain those conditions so that forests can be our natural fire breaks. So that's what we're coming. The summers are going to be getting hotter and hotter. We're supposed to be going into El Nino now, maybe a super El Nino for the next 3 years, which is warmer and drier. So we need all these layers helping us keep shade in and the moisture in these forests. Okay. The Fire Smart is that they would like to break up the forest canopy a little bit, make some gaps so that the tree crowns aren't touching like this together. So if we open them up and give a little bit of a space, they will actually fill back into those spaces over time. Give them the chance to grow into there. Plus there's less trees trying to grab X amount of water and nutrients that are in the soil. If you were to do some thinning and take some trees out, then you'll create that gap. The trees will be less connected. Fire Smart manual then says in zone 2, 30 to 100 feet then is that it asks you to take out and thin a bunch of trees, but she's suggesting that by opening up, taking out some of those trees, you're creating gaps between the other trees, and the ground is already starting to dry out. So, yeah, and even something like Oregon grape, which likes it drier too, or Salal, then those are more used to the drier conditions. So maybe that'll give you some, another couple layers on the ground that will help to umbrella the ground so that the moisture and the sun isn't baking there and getting that moisture away. I mean, some larger rotting logs across the hillside too, going perpendicular too, maybe that can be your water sponge too. So just, maybe some chips. I mean, anything we can do to bump up soil depth, moisture holding capacity of that soil depth, and, opening it up maybe a little bit to get some of these layers of ground veg happening, but then eventually those trees are going to grow back in again. And then, so let's think about, some thinning to take some trees out, or then doing some pruning, but let's work the system to see what's going to be better on each site. And
I'm trying to figure out where the line is between preserving potential fire hazards in the vicinity of, on my land, versus the value in 100 years when it will have been rotted and is feeding.
Right.
But my concern is for right now,
right,
with all the stuff that I have like this
right
on my land.
So that's as I suggested, if you have lots of fresh branches that has lots of needles, and the whole ground of a whole area is covered with them, then I would say you have an issue that potentially if a fire started, somebody flicked a cigarette there, then it could run into there. But scattered pieces like this, like a few here and a few there, and also that one, if you look at that one too, that's quite rotted already too, so it's not fresh, which means it's not going to burn that hot. So how connected is branches on the ground or smaller logs? If there's just a few of them scattered around the place, or there's a whole mess of them and they're all touching each other, and if a fire started at one end, could it just keep on running through that stuff that's on the ground?
it's almost counterintuitive, because when you look at the forest and you see like a brown tree among all the green trees, you're sort of inclined to think, I better get that one down because it's a fire hazard, but that's not what you're saying.
No.
Okay.
Right. I mean, one again. How many is there of it?
Right.
How fresh is it? If the fresher it is, the faster it's going to burn, the more it's going to burn. It's got the energy in there, but the more decayed it becomes, it's becoming less and less of a fire hazard. And then it's hugely important in that deadwood cycle in these ecosystems, right? I mean, somewhere it is, pile it up in places too. How fresh is it? If it's older and really starting to fall apart,
Leave it.
Yeah, leave it, because it's way less of a fire hazard.
Dry, cracky.
Dry, cracky, that's going to be an issue. So let's pile it up and get it out of the way, and then make sure you follow the fire safe guidelines and that defensible space around your house too. But that's the thing, is if it's fresh, brand new kind of stuff, then that's going to have the highest fire hazard. So maybe that stuff even has to be chipped. If there's tons of it, then maybe chip it.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, then if that's too expensive, the pile it so they're all disconnected piles so that there's no way a fire can go running through there. Because what you got to think about is, if, like that meadow we were at there too, if that was all filled with slash, that's what we don't want. So what is it that you've got that maybe is in a lesser situation, lesser amounts, disconnected, scattered about, and how old is it, how fresh is it, and how decayed is it, or how not decayed is it. Logs, and bring them together and maybe sort of try to make what we're calling sort of an engineered or an aggregate coarse woody debris or down log, nurse log. And so you pull a few of them together, see if we can get that, maybe put some wood chips over them, put some other branches over them. Some people may want to do put a berm over them, incorporate all that kind of stuff, but that takes, effort and a digger and all kinds of things. But maybe just pulling some branches together and maybe making some little trenches in them so that the water can get through and see if we can get that fungi going. So something that could be done by hand basically is taking some smaller logs, bring them all together, and see if we can sort of manufacture, group them together to create some rotting logs, not as big as in this. And then plus, by grouping it together, if it's sort of you've disconnected, if it was sort of spread across the hillside, then by grouping it together too, you're disconnecting fuel that then could fuel the fire, let's say, and that kind of stuff. So just a lot of reasons, and if nothing else, maybe you're making a little habitat spot for voles and those kind of things. So just some of the hand-based kind of things you can do too, but you don't necessarily need chainsaws or that kind of stuff. People got hands, so we can do some of these things by hand and still have some positive effects. Hand bomb it.
Are there other things we could be doing other than just planting trees and such?
I would say that getting some of those snags on the ground, bring some branches together, make some of those aggregate snags. Try planting some ground cover too, if it's really dry, maybe some salal, maybe some Oregon grape. If it's a little bit richer, we could try some, the sword fern back here. That's a kind of indicator of moist and richer conditions. Maybe plant some seedlings too, and then put some deer browse around them. But you've got the big layer on top, which is good. It's not bare ground, so that's your starting point. And so what is it that we can add to the mix that isn't going to add, fire concerns and that kind of stuff? But if you're adding a few seedlings here, there, and everywhere, and you're creating some aggregate logs, and those logs have been on the ground for a while anyway, you're not upping your fire risk particularly. You're just making some little biological hotspots, let's say, to see if you can bump up how many layers you've got, and to see if we can, because what we want to do is we want to keep the moisture in the soil. So what is it we can do that does that? However we can add to the sponge, make the sponge better, make the sponge thicker, and just shade everything we've got and cool and keep these, if you can think about these conditions we've had in the forest today, if we can think about those, see how we can replicate that on our private lands, and get some expertise, get some people to come through and look at it. That's Transition Salt Spring, me, other people too would be happy to come and have a look-see and talk about these things, and just float as many boats as we can while we're restoring the ecosystem and making sure that we're cutting out the conditions that'll make forest fires, and we're losing habitat. So let's see if we can we've been subtracting from the ecosystems. Let's see if we can help them to get more layers. As I mentioned, it's a recruitment to everybody that we need help from private landowners to look after the coastal Douglas-fir ecosystem. Because in your properties, you guys may have some of the remnants, you may have some older trees or some really older trees, So it's really a recruitment drive this year too, is that we need landowners' help to look after the coastal Douglas-fir ecosystem and keep and protect and maintain those portions of it that you have on your own private properties. Climate change doesn't care about what we are or aren't doing, but then if we can add up lots of little small things together and pile it into sort of big action, then that will help us. And in the long run, it's going to save money, because if it's only about money, then doing this, looking after these ecosystems, is the cheapest thing, as I mentioned, that we can do. But what's going to cost us, though, the millions and billions, and like we saw with the flooding and the heat dome stuff, is that those costs, the business costs, insurance costs, and to rebuild, and hard infrastructure, like how many times are we going to be able to rebuild the Coquihalla at $1 billion a shot, right? So that's what I mean is that looking after these ecosystems, restoring them, doing some kind of stuff is still going to be a cheaper option than we pay through the nose when there's no limits at all. So it's costing us more money by keeping the status quo going. If it's about dollars and cents, keeping doing what we're doing doesn't make dollars or cents. Yeah.